Alright, so here we go. I'm getting the wiring harness spread out across the front of the Jeep. Keep in mind, this is the first time I've ever actually looked at the harness outside of the packaging, so I was kind of had an idea of what I was going to be doing with it. I knew it had to plug into both headlights and it needed two ground connections. Fortunately, the Jeep has ground connections near both headlights, so that was kind of a win for me. And I actually have an auxiliary fuse panel right about where I'm looking right now. And I had 3 unused circuits on it, so I'm thinking that maybe I would just cut off the inline fuse holder and connect it directly to the fuse panel. I did try later on in the video to try and connect it to the battery, but I ended up cutting that part out because it wouldn't fit over my existing accessory post, and it was I figured I've already got the harness, so I might as well make use of it. So I'm starting by disconnecting the driver's side light, and it's honestly just a simple pull it off, and then I'm going to plug in the new harness. And this harness that I found is quite nice. It's got nice ceramic connectors on it, and it's not too long, not too short, so it's sort of a perfect fit. Using the ground bolts right by the headlights were perfect, and I had practically no problem. So you're going to notice the video jump just a little bit, and what I've done is I've cut all the extra time out when I'm not on screen, when I'm heading to the garage to grab some tools or get my tool chest, etc. Here's me looking for the right size socket, because I have a nasty tendency of always picking the size smaller at first or the size bigger, and in this case I think I nailed it. It was pretty simple. And anyone who's ever worked on a Jeep that's nearing 20 years old knows that you get pretty lucky sometimes and you have bolts that actually come out really easily. In this case, both the ground bolts were simple ones that came off without too much fuss. So I'm just fitzing around. It's right now in Brampton, Ontario, Canada. It is about 3 degrees Celsius, so that's a little cool. My fingers are feeling it for sure, but the sun was nice. So for my American friends that might be watching, 3 degrees Celsius is about 37 degrees Fahrenheit, just to give you an idea of the temperature I was dealing with out there today. Truthfully, I'm wearing just a sweater and some coveralls to keep the dirt off. But you can see me futz around with the wiring. I've already got the one side connected with the ground wire, and I'm headed over to the other side. And the other side's already got a little bit of wiring going on there, because I run my harness for my auxiliary LED lights that are on the front of the Jeep there, so I've got to work around them. And obviously I've got the air box and the wiring harness for the headlight, and I want to make sure that the harness stays out of harm's way, so I ended up routing it in front of the radiator, just along the grill supports. So it was pretty simple. I didn't get fancy. It's all held together with zip ties and on the relays holding it on the braces. But so here I am, just figuring out what's got to plug in. So basically you unplug the passenger side headlight, and the connector that would normally go into the headlight actually goes into this harness. So you're using the switch in the cab to trigger the relays to come on and off for the headlights and the high beams, basically bypassing the switch. So the switch is going to flip the relays, and the relays are going to give direct power. In line I've got a 30 amp fuse. That's actually what came with the harness, running out, so both lights are being fed by less than 30 amps, which is probably still better than the little tiny wires that are coming out of the switch. And the bigger the wire, the more power that they can draw. And if you can get, because it's coming straight off of the battery into the lights, you're saving a lot of resistance there, which means that the lights are going to be brighter. That's the theory behind it. You can see by the sun, I haven't exactly had a chance to get out there and see how they're going to look in the dark, but I will update the blog posting on jeepgarage.ca to have nighttime shots, and I'll try to set it up so that one headlight's working off the switch and one's working off the relay, just to get a comparative shot. But here I am attaching the other ground wire, and it was that simple. The other ground wire is going on, and fortunately whoever designed the harness knew the inside of the Jeep and knew that there would be 2 ground connections right there. There's plenty of extra wires, so I wasn't stretching to get the ground. This is the moment where I'm contemplating if I was going to go right to the battery post. I have an auxiliary post that I put on the side mount so that my battery, or if I'm going to just run to the fuse panel that I've put in there. I'll ultimately I decided on the fuse panel just because it was there and I already had a good wire feeding to it and good connections, so why mess with a good thing? I did actually pop the auxiliary post to see if I could connect direct to the battery, because I've got a ring terminal on the harness as I bought it, so why not check? But it actually didn't fit over top of the post, so I ended up just cutting off the fuse holder. I stripped back the wire loom a little bit, and I cut back the fuse holder and just added a female spade connector to connect to my auxiliary fuse panel. It's simple, it works. Electricity is something I'm comfortable with, so it wasn't like I was reaching for this one. It was pretty straightforward to do. I'm going to save the fuse connector though, the inline fuse connector, because it was actually a ceramic one, so I'm probably going to find use for that later on. You'll have to forgive me here. I'm using my backup set of wire cutting and crimping tools here. My good ones were in the house and I really didn't feel like going inside to get them, so I have a cheap set that I keep out in the garage for quick work, and well, this was quick work, so that was why I did it. And what you're gonna notice here after I cut it is I'm playing with the wiring loom a little bit. I will give them credit. The wiring loom was not split loom, it was actually solid loom, so I needed to go dig out a knife from the garage so that I could split it, because I had pushed it back to cut the wire, but the wire then retreated inside, so a little bit of a should have thought ahead moment, but it was a pretty simple fix. Just sliced it open with a razor blade and cut it off so that it would suit my needs a little bit better. But I'm very impressed with this harness overall. The fact that they used non-split loom, everything's got heat shrink tubing on it, it's all soldered connections. I'm quite pleased with this, and I was not in any way paid or sponsored for this harness. I paid for it completely out of my own money, and I would gladly recommend this harness or anything else that this company makes for any vehicle out there. One of the nice things, because it is the ceramic connectors, is that I could upgrade my bulbs down the road to H4 using the existing harness and not have to worry about the harness melting or overheating. That's always a positive. The other really big positive is that if something were to happen to the harness, if I blew a relay or whatever while I was out on the trail or out on the street, I simply unplugged the harness and plugged the stock connectors back in, and I'm just back to running the headlights as is, which I'm always a fan of. Easy reverting back to what was there is always a nice thing. If I had built the harness myself, which I know I could have done easily, I would have hacked into the existing wiring harness, which means I wouldn't have had that ability to revert back. The $30 was well spent, and as I like to tell people, I'm getting to that age now where it's worth paying to have it done rather than to do it yourself. And in this case, it was worth paying to have the harness built or ordered anyways, rather than spending several hours out there tracing wires and hacking them and soldering and connecting spade connectors and building the relay harness. So what you see here is I'm putting on the spade connector. I'm using heat shrink tubing. I actually use two different sizes of heat shrink because the spade connector takes a slightly larger size and it doesn't seal completely around the wire. So then I put a smaller piece of heat shrink tubing on top of it, and they together seal down and clamp down on the wire. This provides relief strength so that the wire is not being strained right at the spade connector, and it also provides protection from the elements. It is in a pretty safe spot in the Jeep. That's obviously where my air intake is, so that's the side that I keep out of the water. I keep up dry and clean as best I can, so it's not a terrible spot, but anything I can do to make sure that it's sealed up is the right way to go. I have dealt with, in my previous Jeep, a lot of very scuzzy wire, and it's my commitment on this one to make sure that I do all the wiring as best I possibly can using solder when possible, and if not, if I'm using crimp connections, to make sure that they're heat shrinked and not just electrical taped out of the way. So here I am using my handy heat gun, probably the best $9 US I've ever spent. I picked it up at Harbor Freight, and it is a wondrous thing to have, especially for the heat shrink tubing. I spent many years doing electronics with a lighter to shrink down my heat shrink, and this just makes it so much easier to use heat shrink tubing. Aside from the occasional burnt finger if I get a little bit too close to the air coming out of it. So So I'm just shrinking down the first piece of heat shrink, and you're going to see me fiddle now with the second piece just to get it over top. And once I get it in place where I feel it should be, I give it another blast with the gun and shrink it all down so it's sitting right on the wire. And that's nearing the end. Like, that's pretty much this whole wiring harness install, which total time from turning the camera on to turning the camera off, and that involves the parts you didn't see of me running into the garage and back and dropping the zip ties all over the floor and stuff. I spent about 30 minutes, which I think is pretty reasonable for hopefully what's going to be a large difference in my light output in the front. Driving the other night with my regular headlights on a stretch of road up here that had no street lights, and I honestly could have just held my lighter out the window and probably had more light than what I was getting off my headlights. I was getting to the point where I'm concerned that my headlights are so dim that people are missing them. I've been cut off a couple of times in a situation where people have turned left in front of me, and it's been at night and my headlights have been on. So yeah, there we go. I'm getting the zip ties out now, and just gonna zip up the wiring harness. Like I said, it's not pretty. I probably could have, put a couple of sheet metal screws in and screwed the relays into the grill or into the fender, but the zip ties again are part of my thinking that it's easier to fix if I'm out in the bush. If a relay popped on me, I could cut the zip tie, pull the relay, put a new relay in. Really not that big of a deal. Truthfully, if it got down to it, I could pull the whole harness out, which is also nice, as I mentioned. But I like to keep things as clean as possible and done well, but I'm also not averse to sometimes using the trusty zip tie just to make sure that just to make it easy. So I just loop the zip tie around the radiator support through both relays, and then zipped it down, cinch it down tight. Put a couple of them through the grill onto the wiring harness, and that was that. This video doesn't include the actual lights coming on and off. I didn't move the camera, but I do have a couple of pictures on my blog site at jeepgarage.ca, and I'll put a little bit of information in the description of the video. Being my first video, this is my first video with actual narration and stuff. This is a new experience, something different that I thought I'd try. I don't know if I'm going to do it for everything that I do on my Jeep, because I tend to not plan as well as I did for this one. Usually I'm thinking I'm going to go do something, and I go and do it, and then realize I should have taken pictures and taken a movie and recorded thoughts and stuff. So this time I thought I'd try recording it and then sit back here after editing the video footage and adding some comments, so that it wasn't just a video of me doing something with music on top of it. I thought it was a different approach, but there's going to be the blog post that goes with it that explains in some detail what I did and where the products came from, and I'll have a link to everything in the video and in the blog as well. So a couple zip ties. I leave them loose, make sure the wiring's in the right place, and that was me quickly looking over my shoulder. My neighbor was running across the street to talk to my other neighbor, and I thought he was talking to me, but run the wires, pull the zip ties, make sure everything's not touching anything sharp or anything hot. Because of the extensive use of wiring loom on this harness, it's actually pretty straightforward. There was a little bit of wire sticking out just at the connectors, and I wanted to make sure that they were in a position where water wouldn't get to them and where they'd be dry and safe from the elements in general, and make sure that the exposed wire wasn't rubbing against anything. Pop the zip ties off so that I have the tiny little razory nubs that are inevitably going to carve my arm open when I go to do something else. And it was a nice simple upgrade for a very beautiful and sunny Monday vacation morning up here. Putting the cover back on my fuse panel. Tuck all the wiring back in. I have my light harness runs along that edge there underneath the power distribution unit. I run again switches and relays for the the LEDs so that they're not running directly through the switch. And that's it, folks. She's done.